Andrew, when are you finally going to introduce me to your mother? We've been dating for months, and I still haven't met my future mother-in-law, the girl said, holding the hand of her young boyfriend in military uniform. April, I'll get a vacation soon, and we'll visit my mother together. I'll introduce you to her, he said. Do you think she'll like me? The girl asked. Of course she will. My mom's nice. If I like you, she'll like you too, the guy replied cheerfully. Andrew's mother, Amanda, lived in the village. Her husband passed away 10 years ago. He was in the military too. Her son followed in his father's footsteps and decided to be a military man as well. When Andrew graduated and joined the army, his mother decided to give him her apartment in the city and move to the village. She grew up in the village and always dreamed of returning there. But the obstacle was her husband's job, her baby, and frequent relocations, so she did not have that opportunity. So when she finally moved to live in the village, she enjoyed village life to the fullest. She had a tiny farm and a vegetable garden and made jams and preserves. Her son did not visit her often, but she was never offended. She had lived with her military husband for many years, so she knew what military service was like. Amanda waited for her son with her future daughter-in-law. While talking on the phone, Andrew informed his mother that he was going to get married, but he didn't say much about his beloved April. You will meet her in person when we get there, and you can ask her about everything. Andrew was a lot like his father, bossy and willful, but at the same time a very empathetic and kind man. April was very afraid that her future mother-in-law would not like her. It wasn't even because she wasn't pretty, as she thought. April wasn't very tall and only had a high school education. But April had no family. The girl had grown up in an orphanage. Usually, people were wary of someone like her. April was a shy, kind girl who worked as a simple house painter. Her job was very hard, but lately it had become more profitable. Many people asked her to help them with repairs. April also worked at the factory, but in the evening, or when she had free time, she never turned down an opportunity to earn some extra money. The government was supposed to provide her with an apartment soon, but in the meantime, she was living in a dormitory. On the planned day, April and Andrew drove to his mother's house. It was not a long drive. The village was very close to the city. They bought some goodies and gifts and planned to spend their weekend there. April was noticeably nervous and kept holding Andrew's hand. The guy, sensing her tension, encouraged her and kept saying, Come on, don't be afraid. Everything will be all right. My mom doesn't bite. I'm not afraid, the girl replied. As they walked through the village, they looked at the local nature and dilapidated houses. Yeah, the village is slowly dying out. When my mother moved here, there were a lot more people living here. People were living in all these houses, and now look at all these abandoned houses, Andrew told his girlfriend. Maybe they'll change their minds and come back. After all, it's often the case that a house is empty for a while, but then people come back, the girl replied. Maybe. The house we bought for my mom had been empty for years, too. It took a lot of effort to renovate it, but Mom wanted to live here for a long time. So let her live here and be happy, the boy replied. Andrew loved and respected his mother very much. She had always been the standard of feminine beauty and the guardian of the family hearth. He remembered from his childhood how he and his parents often relocated because of his father's work and constantly lived in small apartments provided by the state for the army. His mother, crying into her pillow at night, sometimes complained to his father that she was tired of it all and wanted a normal life and her own home. She was tired of constantly moving from one city to another. As Andrew approached his mother's lot, he pointed at the house and said, Well, here we are. What do you think? What a beautiful house, muttered April. Amanda's house was an ordinary wooden house. The only thing that made it different from all the other houses was that every year it was painted yellow and blue, and there were always huge flower beds outside. Amanda loved flowers. And the first thing Amanda dreamed of when she bought the house was planting large beds of her favorite flowers near the house. Amanda was a brisk, skinny woman who could easily do everything herself. Of course, she was missing a man's pair of hands in the house, so whenever her son arrived, she knew what kind of help she would ask for. The woman greeted them very kindly. As they dined together, they got to know each other, and she talked with April. She realized that her son made the right choice. April also liked Amanda, a very pleasant, hard-working woman. Her home was in perfect order, and everything was in its proper place. It was immediately clear that she was an excellent housekeeper. After talking with the children and asking them about their life plans, Amanda sent them for a walk in the neighborhood. The first thing April was interested in were the flowers. She loved flowers too. When she lived in the orphanage, she always watched their gardener tend the flowers near their porch. Little April would always go over to the gardener and ask about the names of flowers and how to take care of them, and sometimes she would even help to take care of them. So looking at the flowers in the beds, April was thinking of her childhood. After walking around the village, they realized that everything is not so bad, that many people still live in the village and new houses were even built in some places. Later, Amanda told them that many newcomers live in the village right now. After visiting his mother and saying goodbye, the couple left for the city. Andrew drove his fiancée to the dormitory and went home. He lived on the next street, carrying a heavy bag of goodies from his mother. The boy thought about the weekend. When he and his mother were alone, Amanda told her son that she really liked April. "She'll be a good wife for you. I liked April a lot. I'm rarely wrong about people." Soon, Andrew and April got married. After the wedding, April moved in with her husband. Amanda, leaving for the village after the wedding, instructed April, "April, you are the housekeeper now. Decorate this apartment the way you want. Renovate it if you wish, and make it cozy. I have a different home now, so the apartment is all yours. This is your home now." Andrew has lived here long enough, but still the same old wallpaper and outdated curtains. I believe you can make this place much more comfortable. April slowly tidied up the place. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, and they decided to renovate it. April did everything with great joy. For the first time in her life, she had her own place. Her husband supported his wife's choice and fully trusted her tastes. Andrew loved April very much, spoiled her in every way, and with every paycheck, always bought something nice for his wife. One day, when Andrew came home from work, he saw some mysterious expression on April's face. She was smiling and looking at him intriguingly. After washing his hands and sitting down at the table, he jokingly said, "Feed me, my wife." The table was already set. All she had to do was put hot food on a plate for him. Sitting down across from her husband, the girl said softly, "Andrew, you're going to be a daddy soon." "Are you serious?" her husband asked in surprise. "Who jokes about something like this? I'm pregnant," the girl said modestly. "My love, my dear, now we will have a complete family." "Do you want a son or a daughter?" her husband asked her cheerfully. "Andrew, the first child is always wanted, and the gender is not important at all. The only thing that matters is the child's health," replied April. "Well, I want a daughter, so she'll look just like you, as beautiful as you are. I'll call her Little Princess, and then we'll have a boy, too, so he can protect you and his sister. Maybe he'll join the army, like me," Andrew mouthed cheerfully. April's pregnancy was difficult, with constant toxicosis. Part-time work was out of the question, although she didn't need any extra income anymore. Andrew's salary was decent. They had everything they needed and didn't complain about anything. They renovated their apartment and bought new furniture. Now they only needed to save up some money to buy a car. It was Andrew's dream. They lived in happiness and harmony. April agreed with Andrew on everything. Every weekend, Andrew took his wife to his mother's house, away from the dust and noise of the city. He saw how hard it was for April. He saw that she was constantly nauseated and could eat almost nothing. It had even lost weight. And Amanda always had fresh food, even meat and eggs. This is very good for the baby. Childbirth was difficult, probably because April was short and very skinny. Andrew was worried about his wife. He kept calling the hospital, wondering if his wife had already given birth. When April gave birth and they told him over the phone that he had a daughter, he was over the moon. After asking about his wife's condition, he immediately went to his friends to celebrate it and relieve the stress. Andrew picked up his wife from the hospital with a huge bouquet of flowers and in a beautiful car which was kindly borrowed by his friend Bradley, who was also his co-worker. They studied together in military school and were good friends since then. Bradley had also recently married, and their families were very close. Lisa, Bradley's wife, worked at the military headquarters. She was the daughter of their commander, a colonel. They named their daughter Julia. As time went on, the little girl grew up. Over the years, Andrew and April's love became stronger and stronger. They were not only husband and wife, but also best friends. That's very important in family life. One night, while lying in bed with his wife, Andrew asked her to undergo a church wedding ceremony. She cried with happiness and snuggled up tightly to him. Obviously, she said yes. April was a monogamous woman. She never even looked at other men after marriage. She was not interested in anyone else besides Andrew. That's the way it should be in married life. The ritual of the church wedding spiced up their life. It's not that something had changed between them, but April understood that after the church wedding, they became even closer to each other. When Julia went to junior school, Andrew was often away on military missions. April and her daughter were often left home alone. April worried about her husband and was afraid that they will send him to flashpoints. Every time when Andrew came back home, he devoted all his time to his beloved girls. It was very hard for him to be away from home. Often, when he was at the headquarters, he looked at the picture of his wife and daughter and felt so sad that he could even burst into tears. Times were beginning to be difficult for their family. He did not want to upset his wife prematurely, but he already knew that he would soon have a long and difficult trip ahead of him. A short time later, Andrew, Bradley, and their coworkers were told that they had to pack their bags and arrive at the appointed time for the bus. They were leaving for the flashpoint where the hostilities were taking place. Andrew, leaving and saying goodbye to his wife and daughter, did not tell April that he was going to the combat zone. He saw that his wife was so worried that she walked around the home completely lost and didn't even quite understand what to put in her husband's suitcase. April, honey, don't worry. Everything will be fine. This is not the first time they sent us somewhere. I'll stay at headquarters for a while and then I'll come home, Andrew said before he left. She embraced her husband, inhaling the smell of his body, realizing how precious and dear he was to her. Crying, she told him, "We'll be waiting for you. Please be very careful." "I promise to be very careful, my girls. Take care of Mom, Princess. Listen to her and help her in everything," Andrew said. When they arrived at the combat zone, they realized they might not return home alive. The military situation was very difficult. Every minute their lives were in danger, and they tried to survive. Andrew wrote letters to his wife and daughter, keeping quiet about all the details. April missed her husband very much. It was very hard for her to be away from Andrew. The only thing that gave her strength was her daughter Julia. She tried to spend more time with her daughter, chasing away bad thoughts. Julia was growing up, went to school, and attended different extra classes and activities. While her husband was away, April decided to get her driver's license. Before leaving, Andrew had told her, "April, make sure you get your driver's license because we bought a car. Who's going to drive it? Otherwise, the car will just stand idle." And now April got her driver's license and could drive. She and her little girl often went to visit Grandma Amanda. Amanda loved her granddaughter very much. Looking at Julia, Amanda realized she was very much like her son. Julia not only looked like Andrew, but she had the same character. She was strong-willed and stubborn, but easygoing and kind. April and Julia often helped her with the garden. She could handle it herself, but the girls were happy to help her, which made Amanda happy too. After all, it's very nice when someone cares about you and helps you not because they have to, but because they really want to. Amanda tried to comfort her daughter-in-law, seeing her distressed condition. "Darling, don't worry. Everything will be all right. He's not an ordinary soldier. He's an officer. I believe he is somewhere in the headquarters. Just believe in him and wait. It's very important for him." "Of course, I'm waiting for him. I have no other choice. I don't know how I can live without him. I don't need anyone but him," April said. They hugged. Sometimes they could even cry together, and April felt much better. Time passed. For some reason, her husband was still not allowed to go home on vacation, or at least on weekends. That worried April a lot. She sensed something was wrong, so she went to see the unit commander. Arriving at the office and waiting for her appointment, the girl entered, said hello, and asked him a question right from the threshold. "Tell me the truth. Where is my husband? Is he in a combat zone? Did you send him there?" The gray-haired man lowered his eyes and realized that Andrew had told his wife nothing about the flashpoint. He didn't know how to answer the young woman's question. "Yes, I won't hide it from you. He is in the flashpoint, but there are no hostilities at the moment and they are not endangered, so you don't have to worry," he muttered. April could see how nervous he was, tapping his pen on the table and saying these words. She realized there was something he wasn't telling her, but she did not dare to argue and ask him about the details. April also decided to talk to Bradley's wife. Arriving at Lisa's place, April began to ask the girl what she knew about their husband's trip, and Lisa replied indifferently. "What do you mean, what do I know? I know everything. They're in a flashpoint. They're shooting and killing. Don't you watch TV? Our husbands are in a combat zone." April cried, looking at Lisa. "Lisa, how can you be so calm? Why are you so indifferent about it?" "Why shouldn't I be calm? Yes, they are in a combat zone, so what? They'll fight and then come back, but they'll bring us a lot of money," the woman muttered. April could not control herself and cried even louder. "Lisa, everything you say is horrible and disgusting. You're a military wife. How can you talk about it with such hypocrisy?" said April with tears in her eyes. "Don't be stupid. Why do you even care about that? You live well with your child, have an apartment and a fancy car, and you get Andrew's paychecks. What else do you need to be happy?" the woman asked ironically. "You are so silly," April told her, getting up from the table. "I need my husband alive. That's all I need. I don't want the money or a car or anything else. I just want him back safe and sound." After a while, April saw on TV that there had been a terrible fight at her husband's location. A lot of people died, and hundreds were injured. That same evening, they received sad news. 7 people from Andrew's unit had died. Her husband was among them. It was impossible to describe April's condition. She was constantly crying and couldn't come to her senses. Her sobs were turning into hysterics. Julia, looking at her mother, hid in her room. She cried silently and was afraid to approach her mother. The next day, Amanda arrived. The news of her son's death was shocking and unexpected. She didn't understand how it could have happened. They never talked about the fact that he served in a place where he could have died. A neighbor drove her to the city. He offered to help her, seeing her condition. Upon entering the apartment, Amanda saw April. Her face had turned gray from stress and tears, and her eyes were red. She seemed to have lost a lot of weight over the past few days. The soldiers' funeral was in their unit. They died far from home, so their bodies came in closed zinc coffins. 7 coffins were on the parade ground, with pictures of the dead on the coffins. It seemed as if the whole city came to say goodbye to its heroes. 40 days passed like a delirium for April. She cried all the time, forgetting about everything in the world. She didn't even care about her teenage daughter. Julia was left to herself. April's grief was so boundless that she didn't understand what was going on around her. She couldn't believe it had happened to them, and she hoped her Andrew was about to call or write a letter. But her expectations were in vain. The phone was silent, and the mailbox empty. When she visited her husband's grave, April would sit for a long time, talking to him. But she felt as if she were talking to a living person. She could not believe that her beloved husband was in that coffin. April recalled how they had met, how they were expecting a baby, and their happy life. Looking at her husband's picture, she realized they would never see each other again. Never again would he look at her and say sweet words, tell her how much he loved her, embrace her. April felt so sad that she wanted to lie down beside him and just die herself. She knew that she had to pull herself together, somehow. She had a teenage daughter to raise, and now it was the time when Julia needed support, supervision, and motherly advice about everything. But April couldn't help herself. She didn't want anyone but Andrew by her side. In her heart, she hoped that someday he would come back to them. But those were unrealistic dreams. One day, on her way home from work, April met her longtime friend, Nicole. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. Nicole smiled and started asking her about everything. "April, how are you doing? Julia must be all grown up now. How's your husband, Andrew? He's in the military, isn't he? Still in the service? You look so tired. Is everything all right? You've lost a lot of weight," said her friend. April realized this would be a long conversation and invited her friend home. "Nicole, let's go to my place. I live nearby. We'll have tea and I'll tell you all about it," April said, pointing toward the house. They sat at the table and had tea. April was crying, telling her friend everything about her life. Then Julia entered the room. She couldn't take it anymore, so she told her mother what she thought. The girl was talking and crying. She complained that her mother had stopped paying attention to her and had forgotten that she existed, that she was not herself anymore because of her grief, and that the child had no idea how to deal with it. She tried her best to bring her mother back to normal life, but nothing worked. She said this so that her mother's friend, whom Julia remembered from her childhood, would do something to help her mother. It was painful for Julia to watch her mother suffer, and she hoped that her mother's friend would help her. After that incident, seeing her daughter suffer, April finally pulled herself together and moved on with her life. Years passed. Julia graduated from high school and entered the university. They still lived together, just April and Julia. April never got married again. She still loved Andrew. He would not accept any other man in their life. At the family council, they decided that Julia was already grown up and could live alone in the apartment, and April would go to take care of her elderly, sick mother-in-law in the village. April visited the city and did not leave her daughter alone, but she completely trusted her because, after Andrew's death, the child had grown up fast. After her husband's death, April kept mourning for 10 years. In one rainy night, someone knocked on the window. Her elderly mother-in-law said, "April, go check to see who's out there in the middle of the night." April, putting on her robe, went to open the door. "Who's there?" asked April as she came to the door. "It is someone you have been waiting for a long time," someone answered from behind the door. Everything clenched in April's chest. The voice seemed so familiar and dear to her. Her whole life flashed before her eyes. When April opened the door, she was dumbfounded. There was her husband, standing on the threshold. She turned pale, screamed, and fainted. He barely had time to pick her up in his arms. Carrying his wife into the house, he splashed water on her face. When April regained consciousness, he hugged and kissed her. "April, who's there?" Amanda asked from inside the room. April, coming to her senses, still couldn't believe it was him. She had waited for him for so long, and now he was standing in front of her. "I'll be right there. I'll tell you everything, don't worry," she replied to her mother-in-law. Looking at him, she still could not believe her happiness. He looked older, with gray hair, with a huge scar across his face. But he was as precious and dear to her as before. She hugged him, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she could barely speak. "Andrew, my love, I've been waiting for you for so long. Where have you been all this time? You have no idea how much grief we've had." "I know, honey, I understand. But the important thing is that we are together. I'll tell you everything, but now I'm going to go hug Mom." The man spoke softly. "Wait, I have to warn her first," April said, still hugging her husband. "Amanda, please don't worry, but I have to tell you something." "What happened, April? Who was that?" her mother-in-law asked. April looked mysteriously at Amanda and said, "It's like a fairy tale. It just doesn't happen in real life. I don't even know how to tell you." "Why are you talking in riddles? Just tell me. Who was that?" the old lady said and tried to get up. "Don't get up, please, and don't worry," she said. April stepped aside a little and Andrew walked into the room. Amanda cried, unable to believe her eyes. "It really is like a fairy tale. My boy, it's been so many years. Where have you been? What have they been doing to you?" The elderly mother could barely speak to her son. "Mom, I'll tell you everything. Is someone going to feed me?" he joked. And they, with tears in their eyes, went together to the table. At dinner, Andrew told them that, long ago, in that unequal battle where many people had died, he was captured. First they held him captive, and then they sold him into slavery. Him and 2 other soldiers. Now that peace prevailed there, they had traded him from the stage for their companions. But he did not want to talk about all of the horrible, bloody details of his time in captivity. He did not even want to think about it. He would never tell his loved ones what he was going through. He only survived because all these years he believed he would return home to his family someday. He hoped and believed that his wife and daughter were waiting for him. He was very worried about his elderly mother, who must have been told that her son was dead. He had to restore the documents and find out who was buried instead of him. When they arrived in the city, they decided to stop by the store. For Andrew, this life was different. Everything was new. He had to learn everything all over again. Everything in this life had changed over the years. After buying groceries, they went home, holding hands just as when they were young. Life changed with Andrew's arrival. April's appearance had changed noticeably. Her clothes were no longer dark and ugly, but bright and feminine. Andrew was busy sorting things out at the military unit. Julia was finishing the university. She had been dating her boyfriend for more than a year, so they decided to rent an apartment and live together. Her parents didn't mind. Andrew and April tried to enjoy each other's company and make up for the lost time. After a while, April realized she was expecting a baby. When she told her husband, he joyfully took her in his arms and whirled her around the room, just as he did when he was young. "Andrew, but I'm almost 40. It's too late to have a baby," said April excitedly. "April, you're only 40. Millions of people have babies at 40 and are doing fine, raising their children. We got this chance. It would be stupid to miss it," her husband assured her. April really wanted this baby, and she knew in her heart that her husband would never let her do otherwise. 8 months later, they had a healthy baby boy. They named him Bradley, after Andrew's friend, who had died in that unfortunate battle. When she was still in the orphanage, Elizabeth decided she was going to have a big family. Many children. 3 little ones at least, and she and her husband would love them, and they would never abandon them, as they had abandoned her once. Elizabeth didn't even know who her parents were. She was literally left on the street. In the park, on a bench, an old lady noticed a child wrapped in a sheet. It was already autumn and chilly. The woman took the child to a shelter. It turned out to be not far away. That's how Elizabeth ended up there, and she spent her entire childhood there. After graduation, Elizabeth went to work. School's expensive, can't help it. And every day you want to eat and dress nice too. She decided to put off school until later. In the meantime, Elizabeth got a job as a waitress in a cafe. The pay was good, she had enough, and there were a lot of good-looking young men who came in, and Elizabeth liked one of them. Tall, handsome, in a suit, and he looked at Elizabeth a lot. Emma's partner noticed that too. You don't get lost, friend. She winked at Elizabeth. He obviously likes you. I don't know, I'm not his type, said Elizabeth doubtfully. What if it works? Smile at him. Maybe he'll ask you out on a date. The girl took her friend's advice and smiled at him as she served coffee. She looked into his eyes, and his eyes, very beautiful, black like embers, and he immediately reacted. Elizabeth, what are you doing after work today? He asked with a smile. Nothing, Elizabeth replied. Sitting at home. Can I ask you out on a date, say 10 p.m.? I'm just getting off at 11 o'clock. Elizabeth had already decided that nothing was going to work out. Well, that's good, the guy exclaimed. I'll wait for you outside the cafe. You're welcome to go for a romantic moonlit stroll. By the way, my name is Thomas, and I'm Elizabeth, the girl said, embarrassed. I've known that for a long time, laughed Thomas. Well, do you agree? I agree, Elizabeth exhaled. That night, they took a long walk. They just talked and laughed. Elizabeth was easy with Thomas. They didn't even feel any difference in social status. Although Thomas, at 25, was already the head of a department at a large company, but he didn't pay much attention to where Elizabeth worked. It was clear that he really liked the girl, and Elizabeth fell in love at first sight. And when Thomas invited her home to introduce her to his mother, the girl was happy. So was serious. But there was a surprise waiting in Thomas's apartment. In the hallway, a little girl ran out to meet them. Daddy! The girl cried out joyfully and held out her hand to Thomas. He picked her up laughing and kissed her on the cheek. This is my daughter Katie, Thomas said with a smile. The daughter? Where's her mother? Elizabeth felt cheated. Now the wife's coming out too. Why did you bring me here? Elizabeth thought to herself. Katie's mom eloped, Thomas replied simply. We didn't even get married. We were going to, but something kept getting in the way. Then Evelyn got pregnant. We decided to get married after she had the baby, so the bride wouldn't have a pregnant belly, and she gave birth and left me Katie. She ran away. I turned out not to be the man of her dreams. She waited all the time for a prince. Well, aren't you a prince? Smiled Elizabeth. You're my best prince, and the child is not a hindrance to us. Honey, how glad I am to hear that, Thomas admitted. He hugged and kissed the girl. Katie stood beside him, looking at the strange woman. Although she was confused, Elizabeth was not the least bit frightened. The girl knelt down and stroked the little girl's head. Hi, honey. She smiled at the girl. Daddy didn't tell me anything about you. I'll bring you a doll tomorrow. Now here's a chocolate bar. And Elizabeth took a sweet treat out of her purse. And from the room, Thomas's mother was looking at them. Lydia liked her son's new girlfriend. She was nice, kind. Thomas was obviously fond of her, and she made friends with her granddaughter right away. Honey, I'm very glad we met, Lydia said at the end of the evening. And I'm glad too, Elizabeth smiled cheerfully. That's how Elizabeth won the Thomas family over. 6 months later, they were married. That's it, Elizabeth. Now you're going to live your life without denying yourself anything, Emma told her after the wedding. The husband is rich, the apartment is big, it's all right to have a baby. You'll have your own soon. You'll probably leave the cafe now, won't you? No, not yet, Elizabeth replied. I can't live on this money and we haven't talked about it. That's right, Emma agreed. And Thomas makes a lot of money? I don't even know. How's that? The friend wondered. Don't you have a common budget or something? Yes, common. Thomas gives for the household, for my personal expenses too. Otherwise I didn't feel comfortable asking. All right, you'll figure it out. Emma felt a little strange hearing that, but she decided to stay out of other people's lives. In principle, there was enough money in the family and everything was fine. Lydia was with her granddaughter during the day and Elizabeth came home from work in the evening. Mama! Katie shouted joyfully and ran to the girl. And Elizabeth loved the girl. My daughter, she laughed and held Katie close to her. Then Thomas would come home from work and they would all get together for dinner. A real tight-knit family. Lydia rejoiced. At last her son had found a worthy wife. A year went by. Elizabeth was already seriously thinking that it was time for her and Thomas to have a child together. She told her husband about it. Elizabeth, it's bad timing, he grieved his wife. I'm having difficulties at work, and having another child is an extra expense. Can't we wait another 6 months? Okay, honey, Elizabeth agreed. A few days after this conversation, there was a knock on their door. It was their day off. Elizabeth was in the kitchen, and Katie was helping her mother. Thomas, open the doors, she shouted to her husband. On my way, he replied. Did someone want to come over for pie? Then Elizabeth heard Thomas shriek in surprise in the hallway. That's what was at the door, he said confusedly, and pointed to the large basket he was clutching tightly in his hands. What's the present in there? Smiled Elizabeth and peered into the basket. The smile immediately evaporated from her face, and the girl was as surprised as her husband. There were 2 babies in the basket. The babies were sound asleep, even smiling in their sleep. On top of the blanket they were covered with was a note. Thomas read it, frowned, and handed the note to his wife. Thomas, forgive me for this act, but I have no one else to turn to, was written in flat handwriting on a piece of notebook paper. I have a difficult situation in my life. I need to go abroad urgently. I cannot take my children with me. I know that you will definitely respond to my request. Please, let my children stay with you for 6 months. I will pick them up later. Evelyn. She's got some nerve, exclaimed Thomas angrily. Is she going to give me her babies like kittens every year now? My God, they're so cute. Elizabeth sighed as she looked at the babies. How old are they? 1 month at a time, Thomas answered glumly, examining the children's birth certificates, which were also in the basket, and added, Boys, there's a dash in the father's column. Where should we put them? We should call the police. Wait, the police? Elizabeth stopped him. We have to change them. They're already moving. They're hungry now. We've got to get them some food, run to the drugstore. Elizabeth, what are you talking about? Exclaimed Thomas. His voice made the babies shudder, open their eyes, and cried. Why do we need other people's children? But they're babies, Elizabeth replied. A kitten or a puppy is pathetic. And here are babies like that. All the while, Katie stood next to the basket, looking at the twins. Little ones, the girl said affectionately, stroking the babies' heads. Elizabeth took the babies out of the basket and changed them. The babies calmed down a bit, and while Thomas went to the drugstore, one thought kept bothering Elizabeth. Should she report them to the police, or keep the babies? On the one hand, it was absurd. One kid. There were 3. And Katie is Thomas's daughter, and these kids have nothing to do with their family. On the other hand, she grew up in an orphanage, and she knows it's a nightmare. All bought, Thomas said irritably, and slammed the front door. Hush you, Elizabeth answered him. The little ones have only calmed down a little. Elizabeth, stop courting them like that, Thomas was furious. I'll take them to the police now. Let them deal with it. Wait, calm down. I'll feed them first, Elizabeth replied calmly as she prepared baby formula. It's good for you to reason. You're not the one who just got dropped off 2 kids by a stranger. What am I, a virtue? Thomas, we're family, Elizabeth reminded him, and we're going to solve this problem together. I'm working too. Elizabeth herself was at a loss for the evening. She nursed the babies and watched Katie rejoice in the twins. When the children were asleep, she decided to talk to Thomas. Let's keep them, she said firmly to her husband. I'll take care of them. You see, it's a pity for them. They're only just coming into the world, and no one wants them anymore, just like I did. Elizabeth, that's a lot of money to spend on all of them, sighed Thomas heavily. And I want a new car. And we'll buy it, Elizabeth urged him. We'll register the kids in our names. We'll be a large family. There's all sorts of benefits. Why talk about money? They're children. They need care. Look how happy Katie is about them. Her daughter would be upset if we put them in an orphanage. Let's keep them for a while. Thomas agreed. After all the formalities, the babies became full members of their family. They were so peaceful, but Elizabeth had to quit her job to take care of the babies all day long. Evelyn, of course, never came back for the babies. There were 3 children in the house, forever laundry, feedings, walks. By evening, Elizabeth was very tired, and Thomas was increasingly late at work. and then several times he didn't come home at all. Elizabeth suspected betrayal. One day, she checked his phone and saw correspondence with another girl. Elizabeth realized her husband was having an affair. She was so hurt. "I take care of the kids all day long and you go out," she would say to her husband. "What did you want?" Thomas grinned. "I'm a normal man. I need a woman's affection. What about you? Have you looked at yourself in the mirror lately? No hair, no makeup, always in your home clothes." "I just don't have the time," Elizabeth replied grudgingly. "Mind you, it wasn't my ex-boyfriend who gave me the kids. It was your wife. Maybe this one, your next one, will bring us a present too." "You wanted it yourself," Thomas replied. But after these conversations, he stopped staying late at work. At least Elizabeth didn't notice anything. Lydia was often at their house. Of course, she paid more attention to Katie, but she didn't hurt the twins either. Children, what was their fault? Just saying, what a load her little boys got on him. "Lydia, but why the load?" Elizabeth tried to persuade her. "The children are good, quiet, healthy. There's no problem with them." "Little kids cause little trouble," the mother-in-law answered. "And when they grow up, we'll raise them," Elizabeth replied confidently. "We'll also have a baby together, just as long as these ones grow up a little." "Well, okay, if so," Lydia answered doubtfully. And then disaster struck. Katie got sick, and so badly that she had to take a lot of tests and go to hospitals. There was a suspicion of a genetic disease, and then it turned out that Thomas was not the girl's biological father. The man was in shock. Fortunately, the doctor's suspicions were not justified, and Katie soon recovered. And while she was in the hospital, there was a scandal in the house. Thomas decided he no longer intended to raise other people's children. "I really am an idiot," he shouted angrily, "and it's your fault too. Allegedly, I feel sorry for the children." "That's enough. I'll go to the guardianship office tomorrow and write a statement. Let them take all 3 of them to the orphanage." "And Katie?" Elizabeth was shocked. "You've been raising her since birth." "And I almost raised these 2 from birth too," Thomas was angry. "But that doesn't make them any closer to me. Understand? I want to raise my own children." Lydia was at her son's house the same time. She didn't say anything. Yes, it wasn't nice to do that to Katie. She was considered one of their own. But it was better to work it out now. And her son did need his own children. "Thomas, what did you think of me?" asked Elizabeth tearfully. "They're like family to me now. They call me their mother." "So raise them if that's what you want," Thomas replied angrily. "And me? I've got the one that's going to give me my children." "So you kept having an affair with that girl," perplexed Elizabeth. "What a scoundrel you are, Thomas." "I'm tired of being a fool," Thomas replied. "Anyway, I've made up my mind. Pack your things and leave with the children. This is where I and my beloved will live. And tomorrow I will file for divorce with you. By the way, no court in the world will make me pay you. The children are not my family. I'll find good lawyers, you know that." Elizabeth was literally stunned by these words. The one she had trusted, the one she'd loved. He was so mean. Lydia was silent, only averting her eyes from her daughter-in-law. She felt more sorry for her son. Elizabeth gathered her things, dressed the boys, and called a cab. She had nowhere else to go. Only Emma could shelter her. "What else could it be, friend?" replied Emma, when Elizabeth opened on her door and told her, "Come in and live with me. I've got 1 room available, and I'll make room for the kids sometime." "Thank you, Emma." "It's nothing." Emma had already picked up one of the babies, grabbed her bag, and headed for the room. "You'll see. Things will get better." Elizabeth took Katie from the hospital to her new apartment. The girl couldn't figure out where her daddy and grandmother were. "They went far away," Elizabeth lied, and it was a lie for good. How can you explain to a little man that he was betrayed at one moment by the people closest to him? A year went by. Elizabeth was able to get the twins and Katie into kindergarten, and Elizabeth herself worked at the cafe as a waitress. She was grateful to Emma. Life went on. Thomas, as promised, did not pay the children anything after the divorce. Lydia had forgotten all about her granddaughter in an instant, but Elizabeth decided she could do it anyway, and she could raise her children. One day, Elizabeth noticed a homeless man outside a cafe. He was still a young man, but it was obvious that his life had taken its toll. He was sitting on a bench and he looked dejectedly at the satisfied, well-fed people coming out of the cafe. The place smelled so good. The man occasionally swallowed hungry saliva, and Elizabeth couldn't look at it anymore. She ran into the kitchen and asked the cook for a couple of meatballs, some potatoes, some buns, and got some tea. "Eat," she said to the man. He looked at the girl in surprise. He was already unaccustomed to normal human companionship. Everyone around him treated him with disgust. And here was such a beautiful girl handing out food and smiling. "Thank you," he whispered, and began greedily gulping down the food. Elizabeth left so as not to embarrass him. Then regularly, she began to feed him. They got to know each other. Elizabeth learned a shocking story. A few years ago, Daniel was a successful doctor, practicing chiropractics with a family, and one day, as his daughter and wife were driving to his house in a cab to celebrate their wedding anniversary, there was an accident. The daughter was killed instantly. His wife was on a ventilator for 24 hours and died as well. Burying his beloved girls, Daniel began to bury his grief with alcohol. He lost his job. Then fraudsters took away his apartment. He became an unneeded man. Friends betrayed him. Relatives pretended they never knew him. So he wandered around basements and back alleys, hungry and dirty, only occasionally managing to earn a little money. Daniel decided that his life had lost its meaning, and he even considered stepping under a car at one point, or jumping off a bridge. And then a girl at the cafe offered to help. Daniel suddenly realized that not the whole world was against him. Maybe things would change, and Elizabeth felt so sorry for him. By then she was able to rent an apartment. Emma, of course, was not against their presence, but she had her own personal life. So one day, when the children were in kindergarten, Elizabeth invited Daniel to her place to wash and clean up. He refused at first, but Elizabeth was persistent. After the baths, he came out a completely different man. He was handsome, slightly older than Elizabeth. Yes, life had taken its toll on him, but that was okay. That day they sat for a long time talking. Suddenly, the girl offered him to stay with her. "I have 3 children. You'll look after them while I'm at work. It's very hard for me to bring them up alone. In the evenings I rush to the kindergarten, then home, laundry, cooking. So are you okay with that?" "Aren't you afraid to let a stranger into the house?" asked Daniel. "I can see that you're a good man," Elizabeth smiled. So they started living together, and 6 months later they started a relationship. The children fell in love with Daniel. Very soon they began to call him Daddy. The man was able to recover at the clinic. Then one day Daniel was found by his former patient's father. Somehow, with the help of massage, he literally put a young boy on his feet, saved him from disability. They met by chance at the clinic. Daniel, by the way, worked there again, thanks to the efforts of Elizabeth. The rich man was very happy to meet the savior of his son. He knew of Daniel's distress, knew of his plight, and the fact that he had been homeless for several years. As a thank you, he transferred a large sum of money to Daniel's account. He couldn't do it before. Daniel had disappeared very quickly after the tragedy. Now they hugged like old friends and wished each other good luck. Daniel used the money to open a private clinic, and Elizabeth was pregnant by then. A 4th child for Elizabeth. So exciting. She was raising 3, and she had never given birth herself. It was scary. But there was support. Her family. So 10 years went by. The Daniel Clinic was one of the best in town. Elizabeth had long had her own cafe, where Emma was the manager. The children were growing up. One day Elizabeth saw an amazing couple walk into their cafe. A woman, overweight, and next to her a thin, tall man. And the woman was clearly older. She looked rich. "Honey, are you comfortable?" the man asked, motioning her to a chair. "Honey, aren't you stuffy? What can I get you?" "Thomas, but you know," she answered irritably, "freshly squeezed orange juice." "Waiter!" The man literally jumped up from his seat to quickly place his order. And then Elizabeth recognized him. It was amazing how much he had changed. Thomas, her first love, thinner, graying hair, and how ridiculously he runs around this lady. Where's that handsome, statuesque fellow? Now he looks more like an elderly footman. He recognized her too. Elizabeth could tell by his surprised look. She was sitting at the bar next to the bartender, and then Thomas's friend had gone somewhere urgent. Thomas walked over to the bar. "Hello," he said to Elizabeth. "You've changed. You look prettier. Are you working here? How are you anyway?" "This is my cafe." Elizabeth smiled. "The kids are growing up. Husband's a famous doctor. We're doing well. How about you?" "Married recently." He sighed heavily. "She's a good one. Don't look at her if she's grumpy." "I see." Elizabeth smiled. "I'm so sorry. I have to go pick up the kids from soccer practice. My sons are playing soccer. The coach is praising them." "Sure, go." He nodded sadly. He wanted to say something else, but he didn't dare. He just stared after Elizabeth. Beautiful, young, successful. And she had once been his wife. Too bad nothing could be undone.